the body doesn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
The body speaks physiological expression. I think we, in the modern world, oftentimes just think of those as being like predicaments.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Nimai Delgado, and today I have my good friend, Aaron Alexander, on with us to talk about who knows what. We're going to get into some interesting conversations, as we always do. But before that, I'm going to do a brief bio for my friend Aaron. So Aaron is one of the foremost experts on how to utilize the body to improve all aspects of your life. He is the host of the Align podcast, which I highly recommend listening to, and the author of the Align Method, 5 movement principles for a stronger body, sharper mind, and stress-proof life. As a holistic performance coach, he has helped thousands of people, including some of the world's best athletes and celebrities, optimize the function of their body. So, welcome, Aaron.
Thanks for not reading the bio off of like the website or whatever. I always find that to be the most awkward thing. Do you get that? And someone reads like they're reading
the bio from the website,
prepackaged bio.
Yeah,
it's not meant to be read.
Yeah,
out loud. You read it.
Yeah, it's interesting to I always try to find different bios and descriptions of what a person does, and then also try to incorporate some of my own personal experience of that person into the intro.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have had plenty of interactions. We've known each other for a few years now. And to be honest, I always love our conversations, like whether it's skating or at a ecstatic dance party or a gathering at Peter Crohn's or one of our friends or Andres and Blues. I always just love what we talk about. So I find it like intriguing and thought-provoking, and we always seem to bounce ideas off of each other and just continue to play devil's advocate. Yeah. In every one of our conversations. So I thought, why not have a conversation here on the show? So
I think one of the things that's interesting, typically the places that we have conversations, we are moving our bodies in some way. We're like opening up physical plasticity, which lends itself to neuroplasticity and cognitive function, and kind of just bending the way that we perceive reality through augmenting the way that we move in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a consistent one-to-one relationship with that.
That is very true. Whether it's doing acro yoga and you're flying me and we're just having a full-on conversation while we're doing acro yoga, or whether we're skating down the Venice boardwalk, watching the sunset.
There was there's some actual research about the way that our postural patterns affect our thoughts and perceptions and our memories. It was done in San Francisco State University. They took 2 groups of people. One group, they had them hunched over in like basic, staring into a screen position.
Mm-hmm.
And another group, they had them standing upright, strong, proud, confident position. And what they found between the 2 groups was that it was actually easier for the group that was in the upright position to be able to access feel good, like positive in quotations, memories. And then it was easier for the group that was in the hunched over, slouched postural position. The term for this is postural feedback, to access times that, harder times for them.
Interesting.
And the reason that would be likely, there's a lot of things. We can kind of unpack some of the directions of why that might be. But are you familiar with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming?
Yes.
In that you might anchor yourself with some type of smell or some type of sound before you do a podcast or do something that you care about. You might play like a specific song, or you work out, you have like your workout playlist. So you start to tee yourself up with those by activating your senses in this repeated way, so that every time you go into that situation, you have that memory of, oh yeah, when I hear this song, this is how I feel. You're like, whoa, it like turns something on. And so the suggestion within that would be that we also, a part of our senses would be our kinesthetic senses. And when we anchor ourselves into these different positions of being like hunched over, typically that would be a defensive posture or a defeated posture, collapsed posture. It's the literal definition of depression.
Yeah, your shoulders kind of rolled forward, hunched over.
Yeah, so every person
pressing your body down.
So there's no right or wrong direction for the mind to go. If you're thinking about sad thoughts or happy thoughts or whatever, it's like great to open up the whole canvas of potential of thoughts. But an interesting thing to be aware of is when you are feeling kind of sad, like what's your postural expression of sadness? What's your postural expression of confidence, of safety, of support? And so if you watch yourself, you'll notice, oh, wow, there's a direct translation to the way that I think and the way that I feel to the way that I posturally express. So now I can start to work with that relationship, and maybe I can start to change my body to change my mind, or change my mind to change my body. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it was a quote in your book that said it's easier to, I'm going to butcher this. It's easier to act your way into a new behavior than to think your way into a new behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get the ball rolling with the body.
Yeah.
William, I'm sure we won't just talk about like reciting research-based stuff, but William James, who he's known as the father of modern psychology, he was one of the first researchers or thinkers to suggest that we really do move ourselves into emotional states. And so I include this in the book as well. It describes if you're being attacked by a bear, you would move yourself into these defensive positions or afraid positions, or, all these postural expressions. And then from his lens, those emotions would follow the movement. And so you can kind of like hack yourself into feeling a way. And so if people listening, if they've ever done, public speaking, for example, or if you're just out in public, hanging out, you're on a date in some scenario where you feel kind of uncomfortable, like, watch your body, watch what it does. It'll go through these self-soothing mechanisms. It'll cross its arms,
protect your organs,
right? It might start massaging its legs.
Yeah,
it might do what's the movie where she puts her hands in her armpits and smells them?
Superstar.
Yeah, I do one of those. And so you can notice that with yourself, and life just gets more interesting, I think, when you start noticing these subtle patterns. That's the big thing.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier about like even just going to the gym. For me, I do have like more of a ritual where I like to listen to songs that hype me up. So in the car, I'll literally be priming my body for the workout by like listening to something, which is like an auditory cue for me to get into a state of mind and like change the person that I am mentally going into the gym. Like I'm not going to be the same person going into a business meeting than I am going into the gym. So I'll prime my body. I'll move it around. I'll get hyped up.
Who are you in the gym? Who are you in the business meeting?
Who am I in the gym?
Yeah, and who are you in the business meeting? What's the difference?
I would say that I'm a little bit more. So in the gym, I put on the persona of beast, right? Whatever that beast nature of Nimai looks like.
Yeah.
So take no prisoners. Whenever I like approach a workout, I really think of me conquering, right? The weight. I think of me coming out of the gym as this more powerful version of myself, and I have to almost go into battle to come out the other side as a more powerful individual. And I would say in a business meeting, I'm a little bit more assertive in the way of what I'm trying to accomplish, but not dominating. More of like a curious / intentional person that like likes to hear all sides and then make a reasonable decision moving forward, but not so much of like a dominating beast, like take no prisoners.
That's cool.
Mentality.
That's cool differentiation. And then I would suggest that there's likely space for those characteristics in the gym and the business meeting. It's like being able to oscillate between all those different, the potential colors on your palette of who you are, your personalities, your personas. And I think that that's actually one of the issues that I ran into in my own history with fitness was I don't know, probably it's been like 13 years that I was like really obsessed with bodybuilding. And then before that, it was, for like a 6-year period. And I think I had more of that mentality of like crush, destroy, which I know that that's not who you are at all. It's just a thing that you like to play
Tap
with. It feels
into.
good. That's why I like
Yeah.
listening to gangster rap.
Yeah.
It's so funny seeing me listening to gangster rap.
Yeah.
Just like nothing in relation to my life at all.
Yeah.
But I'm just like,
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
it's a good sensation to feel that aggression. But I think during that time, for the way that we treat our body with fitness or exercise or training, I think there is a lot of space on the table for us to have that that empathetic and compassionate and like listening lens, because sometimes the body doesn't want to be crushed.
So I would say that part of me is like the caretaker, like the nurturer.
Yeah.
The more like self-soothing part of me is in the aftercare of like my yoga or my meditation or my stretching.
Yeah.
Like I do that on a daily basis, but then whenever I listen to myself in those moments to see when I do enter the gym, like what I can work on, and then how to approach it like most effective. Like I'm not gonna go and try to max out I never try to max out anyway, but like push myself beyond what I feel capable of in that moment. So I just take it day by day.
What do you do to get inspired to train? Because I think that's a big thing that people deal with for sure. It's like, it's not the training itself, it's actually getting yourself to the training. Like when you're feeling days where you're feeling like shit or you're feeling just like, no, what do you do in those times?
I still go. I think I still go and do some type of movement. It doesn't, I know what I'm capable of as far as how intensely I can train based off of what I went through or to during my bodybuilding days. And like, it was all about being as big as possible, trying to put on as much mass as possible. And I know like how much weight I was lifting back then for the total volume I was lifting back then. And then now I know that isn't necessarily my goal, but I can still approach the, whatever that looks like on a daily basis. So my goal now isn't to be as big as possible. It's to be more functional, more athletic, to feel really good in all types of movement, and then still maintain muscle. And I genuinely like training. So it is a form of outlet for me to move energy. So whenever I don't move my body, you can ask Bianca, I even when I wake up, I feel this like surge of energy go through me where I can open my eyes. I'm not one of these people that needs to take it slow to kind of like slowly wake up. Like I open my eyes and I can just hit the ground running. And in the gym, moving my body in that way is a way for me to clear a lot of that energy so that I can be more present and still throughout the rest of my day. So that's why I like to work out early as well, so I can exhaust a bit of that initial surge of energy and then have the rest of my day to be more still and creative and do my meetings and kind of focus more on that aspect of myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting how I'd be curious your perception on what tension, like chronically held tension in the body is. Because it's very interesting how we feel so good after we work out. Like post-training, typically for most people, it's like, wow, it's amazing. You see yourself in the mirror, like, damn, hopefully, you at least feel a little better than you did before. You're like a little bit more damn than you were before you came in, regardless of the situation. And a part of what's happening in that, outside of, a hormonal lens, where you could think of your muscles kind of like endocrine glands. So as you're contracting and expanding and lengthening and twisting and turning and all that, it's really like you're juicing these glands. And start to upregulating all the hormones and the neurochemistry that makes you feel good. And I think it's that your body's kind of like it's sending the signal that you're overcoming some type of struggle. It's like EMDR therapy. When you are navigating terrain, you're looking left, you're looking right, you're looking left, you're looking right. That's simulating what you would do if there was a predator behind you. You would, or in front of you, whatever. You would address the predator, and then you would probably turn around and get the hell out of there. And in that process, you'd be walking and you'd be looking, and it's sending the cue to your physiology that whatever the problem was, we don't care what the problem was. We're doing something about it.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just freezing up. And so I wonder, people that have, and like myself, have like chronically held tension in the body. What do you think chronically held tension in the body is? I know this is your podcast and I'm not supposed to be interviewing you, but I think it's interesting.
This is our conversation.
Yeah, right.
So, I'm glad so how would I define chronically held tension in my body? Let me think about this for a second.
And people can stew on it at home.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing just to address, like, what is chronically held tension in my body?
Yeah.
Is it purely musculoskeletal? Is it just like a kinesiological type thing? Is it purely emotional? Is it purely, energetic?
I feel like it's all inextricably linked and connected in some way. I don't know if I could isolate it into one, because I mean, I've read books like The Body Keeps Score, for example, and I've done EMDR therapy before, and seeing the link between the physiological manifestation of emotional trauma or unresolved emotional feelings and how they store themselves. I feel like it's so interconnected. I don't know how I would separate those two. I know what it feels like physically whenever I feel tense, and like what happens when like my shoulders will kind of raise up to my ears. For me personally, the right side of my body normally holds more tension than my left. So anytime I get work done from a body worker or do ART, they always tell me that my right side is much more tense than my left, so it holds a lot more tension. And I know there's some correlation between like the masculine, feminine energies there. So maybe there's a pattern there with my masculine that's needs some emotional resolution or processing there, or if it's a function of me having tight hips and tighter hamstrings that's kind of working its way up my spine and manifesting in tension there. So I don't know if I have an answer, like a direct answer for you is what my definition is of it. I just understand the connectedness of it all.
Yeah, I think it's just all interconnected, but it's the first step towards starting to release the tyranny of the past is through gaining a relationship with your physical self. That's a quote from Bessel van der Kolk. It's not exact, it's a paraphrase quote, but it's something like that. The first step of releasing, something like that, but the general gist. And I think that it's such a powerful thing to start to just look in and be the observer of these feelings. And so sometimes I think that we can feel a way. I'm speaking for myself. I'll feel a way where I'll feel like this like angst or this like tension in my stomach or my chest, or I feel like a weight or like a pressure, and it's such a powerful tool to be able to have the spaciousness to be able to step back for a moment and just objectively examine what this is. And in the process of doing that, it creates separation. So as opposed to this being who you are, it's just a thing that is happening. And as we start to create that distancing through observation of the tension that we feel in our chest or our stomach or our shoulder or whatever, from there, then I think it's like we can maybe start asking it questions. And that's like this is from a practice called felt sense. People can look up felt sense. And that's in the felt sense practice, you go through these various different list of questions where you isolate the place in the body that feels tense, and you sit with it. Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a texture? Is it loud? Is it quiet? And just starting to kind of come up with this like personality, like, okay, what is this? And then from there, you can start to literally have like discourse with this part. And I think that that's such a beautiful path towards resolution, as opposed to continuing to kind of like run away in a sense, like literally, it could be like literally running away, like going for a run, which that's in a lot of like ultra marathon athletes. Oftentimes there's, obviously it's not like 100% of the time, but there occasionally is a trend of having some type of like addiction or something of the sort. So it's like, as long as I'm just running, I feel I feel okay while I'm running.
Yeah. Yeah. They
So I
talk
went
about
for
like the pain cave, right? It's like
right.
they get to a point where it's just like you got to go through it. Like
Yeah.
there's a certain point when you're doing that type of training where you have to think about something, and like you said, maybe the locomotion of you moving your body and the oscillation of just having that movement like kind of allows those memories to come up with a more objective or curious perspective.
Yeah, it sends a signal to your physiology that you're doing something.
Yeah.
Which that's great because it does create a pretty immediate resolution. And then I think like the bigger picture from there is when is it appropriate to not just fall back on the tools, but also have a part of your toolkit being to go deeper into the sensation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the subtle signals that your body may be sending you that maybe some people are unaware of, where it's just their default feeling of sensation, and they don't have the acute sense of where something might be giving them a signal to say, hey, this could be something emotionally that's manifesting physically, or maybe something physically that is in your environment or your posture or what you do on a day-to-day that could be leading you to feel negatively because it's affecting you both ways. Like it's a two-way street.
Well, a reframe of the sensations that we experience in our bodies that I think is valuable is to look at everything as information. So there's no bad, good, positive, negative. It's just information.
Mm-hmm.
I have acne, information. I'm obese, information. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I have this rash. It's always itching, this rash.
Mm-hmm.
So as opposed to it being like, oh, my body's failing me or I'm failing, I need to seek out some medication. And sometimes medication is the solution. It's great. But I think our relationship to the vernacular of the body, like the language of the body doesn't speak English or Spanish or like any kind of language that we would typically be communicating with another person.
Mm-hmm.
The body speaks physiological expression in the form of inflammation or in the form of aggregation of adipose tissue or all these different things that I think we in the modern world oftentimes just think of those as being like predicaments.
Mm-hmm.
But a really, I think, truly powerful reframe is to think of all of the signals that we're getting from our body, that joint inflammation, that back pain, that all, fill in the blank thing, as your body speaking to you and saying, okay, we need to create a change. It's like, oh, cool. Like, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, thank you for this obesity,
mm-hmm.
Or thank you for this joint pain, to speak something that I'm, more accustomed to. And then from there saying, okay, like, what are you saying? And then actively seeking solutions. And typically those solutions would be looking side to side and going forward and communicating to somebody. And so I think have you ever thought about that?
In what way?
Thought about the signals that your body is saying to you as like your body is continually having a conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no bad thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's just your body having a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a relationship with your girlfriend, if Bianca had some stuff to say to you that you're like, oh, it hurts.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be like, bad Bianca.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're like, why are you doing this to me, Bianca?
Mm-hmm.
You'd be like, oh, like, what are you saying? Like, I need to hear this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to avoid this.
Yeah. I had this conversation.
How can I be with this more?
Yeah. I had this conversation 2 days ago with a friend and just spoke about the interesting relationship that we have with this vessel, right? Mm-hmm. It's like we are an observer that's occupying this vessel, and it is its own, meat suit, and then we have a relationship to it, right? It's what you kind of alluded to earlier was that like it's sending you signals and how we interpret those signals or information.
Yep.
And then normally transposed onto that is our own judgment, or it could be misinterpretation of what those things are. But the fact that we have this relationship that we're constantly like in relationship with our body, like it's just fascinating to me that rarely do I think about it. It's just like, just wake up and just start my day.
Yeah.
You
If
know?
everything's in alignment, you don't need to think about it.
Yeah.
Like if everything's working, you won't notice anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you start to notice that's the indication, like, okay, something's up. You know, if you're skating down the what do we call it? The boardwalk, and your wheels are, it's just like, it's just gliding. And you're like, it's almost like you're not on a skateboard. You're like, man, it feels like I'm flying. You're like, oh, cool. That skateboard's like working real good. You know, and your relationship is like real good. It's the moment that there's like sand in the bearings. It's like, and you're like, man, I really noticed this skateboard a lot. You're like, that's your body.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not like we continually need to be in this over obsessing experience where we're always noticing the body. And I get like more spiritual points if I notice a lot of stuff in my body. It's actually an indication that there's something awry, and you're starting the process of unraveling that. And then a person can get into another bind where suddenly they're continually seeking out what's wrong. And if you're continually seeking out what's wrong, you'll just keep on unpacking the wrongness of the world. And so it's like having the balance between those things that I think is really valuable.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And even with being a fitness coach, I talk about this in a way where if you feel good in your body, that opens up the space to be creative. It opens up the space to maybe have better relations with other people. But if you're in this chronic state of pain, or there's constant noise from your body sending you signals, like your mental resilience will go down. The likelihood of you being, in your power and being creative and being that force, then it's probably diminished, or the volume's turned down a little bit. So for some people, that is their state, where there is just this constant noise happening within them that has become their normal. And it's hard to move through this, their life with all that noise.
Yeah. There's a thing, I just did a podcast with a guy called Ethan Cross, or a book called Scattered. And it's all about like the inner chatter inside of our mind and like the ongoing voice that we have, which is really interesting. Like we have, you ever been embarrassed because you're talking to yourself out loud, and then suddenly like somebody sees you, you're like, oh, like, you ever have that experience?
Yeah. Yeah.
We always have this voice running.
Yeah.
What does your voice sound like?
What does he sound like?
Is it a he?
I suppose. It's just kind of this.
Seriously,
it's just a voice.
What does the voice sound like?
I know what it sounds like when I say it out loud because it's coming through me. I don't know if I can describe what it sounds like because it's always in my head. Yeah,
British?
No accent. Feels like
seductive.
I feel like it's
like wooing you.
Normally positive voice.
Yeah.
It's normally telling me good things. But then I feel like there's multiple personalities in there. There's like the guy that's always pretty positive and looking for the silver lining of things. And then there's the darker whisper that's a little bit more insidious that will find his way into the conversation.
Yeah, so the reason I say that is as far as like an actionable tip that I got from Ethan that I thought was cool was speaking about yourself in third person, which I think kind of makes you like a crazy person or something, but it's called distant self-talk. So having a conversation with you and actually saying like, okay, like, what are we doing here, Nimai? Like create that distance between the feelings that I'm experiencing or, the thoughts or any of that. Have the distance between, okay, here's Nimai and here's, the observer of Nimai. And so if Nimai is having a complete meltdown, that doesn't affect the observer, right? That's like a Ram Dass quote. He says, who you think you are is vulnerable, who you are is invulnerable. So as long as you're entertaining or engaging bandwidth into that observer part, Nimai can be going through all sorts of shit. And there's still that observer part that's, connected to more than just the inflammation or just the anxiety or just the depression or just the sleeplessness or just the whatever. Saying like, okay, Nimai, what are we doing here? Like, what's the next step? And then another thing he mentioned was, it's a fancy word for like time traveling, but putting yourself into the future, talking to yourself from the future, and saying, okay, like what would future Nimai say about this experience, or like what's the advice from future Nimai? And a part of what he was suggesting in that is like, it's so hard, and this is the distant self talk as well, predominantly the distant self talk actually. It's so easy for us to give someone the perfect immaculate advice. You're just like, damn, like I was channeling. Like this is like, wow, like, yep, do that. That's the path. But then doing that with ourselves for me is like not as easy. What about for you?
Same, 100% the same.
Why is that?
I don't know.
He calls it the Solomon's paradox. It was like a biblical thing. Solomon was like super swell, wise fella, and then his life was all
in disarray.
Wily.
Yeah. Sounds about accurate for many of us probably listening. You reminded me of an exercise that I did with my therapist in one of our sessions. I won't go into detail about like the specific event, but we were talking about a traumatic experience that I had in my life. And she was asking me to tap into what I was feeling in that moment and say any thoughts or feelings that came up. And I could remember visually and describe it, but I could not tap into the emotion of that experience. And then she said, okay, let's rewind this. Let's try this again. Now imagine that you are in a movie theater and there's nobody else in the movie theater with you, and you are watching this experience as it were a scene in a movie. And you saw a 13-year-old boy in his room whenever this traumatic experience happened. And just watch it. And then now describe what, if anything, comes up. And what was interesting is that when I did that, then it invoked all of these emotions. When previously, when I was identifying as myself experiencing it, I was shut off to it and almost disassociated from the intensity of the emotions that I was experiencing.
You created distance so you felt safe enough to access it.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And after that, I had a breakthrough. And I was like, wow, what an interesting exercise. Just
yeah. I think I still have a lot of shit to dig up in my own past. I think there's still parts, I absolutely know there's still parts that in like speaking to a therapist, there's certain kind of aspects that I can hear my voice kind of like wavering a little bit, or I'll feel like my voice will crack a little bit, or I'll start to maybe feel some anxiety or something of the sort, which again, all of that stuff is so cool. Like if you can start to be enamored by the language of the subconscious body, like the way it speaks through your physical tissue and your larynx and your breathing patterns and all of that. It's just such a cool thing to be like, okay, cool. When we're talking about that, whatever time when I was 13 or whatever it may be, suddenly I can notice myself go through these physiological like defense mechanisms, and you can observe it and say, okay, like that's where we go. So if you can start, I think that's like a solution to a lot of the subconscious ails. It's like, how do you know what you don't know? I think a way that you learn what you don't know or develop that part of yourself is to be around people that challenge you, for one thing. They're not just like a bunch of yes men. Like they're like, huh? Like, what was that? Did that feel totally true? And listen to those cues. And as opposed to, I think it's way easier you hear those cues and you say, I don't like this feeling, change the subject. I think we can change the mindset and like this feeling, Nimai is feeling some ways right now.
Yeah.
Like interesting. Why is Nimai feeling these ways right now? And then from there you can start to open it up. And I think that we can change our perception of, instead of like seeking comfort all the time, which ultimately I think leads to maybe not always disease, but in modernity, we've been almost burdened by comfort. And in the process of seeking discomfort, suddenly that opens us up to this like more expressive actualized version of ourselves, which feels really good.
Mm-hmm. There's so many parallels between fitness and doing this type of emotional work.
Yes,
It's
same
like
thing.
emotional fitness, or
Find your shadow spots in your body.
yeah.
Why is your posterior shoulder girdle so flaccid?
Mm-hmm.
Why are your lower traps and your rhomboids and your glutes or your, anterior tibialis or your flexor hallucis? Like, why is your big toe drifting fucking across the room?
Mm-hmm.
Why is there so much you can't engage any of that? There's so much shadow in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you just keep on doing the things that impress people?
Yeah. Why are you only working out biceps?
Dude, your biceps are fine. A lot of light in the biceps, bud.
But it's true though. I mean, it's like even like going to the gym. That's how you approach your physical body, right? Is you're like, okay, here are the areas that I want to develop. This is the exercise that I have to do. These are the repetitions that I have to come in and continuously do in order to see that where I am and the threshold of where I need to lean in. Mm-hmm. and actually experience some discomfort that may come in the form of doing more repetitions, doing higher weight, switching up the angle in which you do a workout, maybe training with somebody else that shows you a weak point of yours that you just typically avoid because you just don't like that exercise or that movement, maybe because you're just not used to it or you're not as good at it as something else. So you just avoid it altogether, and then you can develop these overcompensatory patterns.
Yeah. Is keeping yourself, a fancy term for it is keeping yourself in the zone of proximal development. So keeping yourself on like the edge of your boundaries. That's I think what keeps us engaged in a relationship. That's what keeps us engaged with like a workout partner. That's what it keeps us engaged with a workout. It's if you're continually at that place of like, I don't know if I can do this. Like I did it. Mm-hmm. Like that's a coach. Mm-hmm. A coach is able to be sensitive enough to know exactly what is your breaking point. Where are your boundaries? Okay, I'm going to just on an ongoing basis, I'm just going to be shotgunning these obstacles that you can barely make over. Mm-hmm. And every time we hang out, you're just going to have obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. You didn't think you could do it, and then you could. You proved yourself wrong or right or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of that hour session or conversation, we both walk away and we're like, oh, wow, I'm like a little taller.
Yeah.
I feel like a little more confident.
Yeah, I did that thing I didn't think I didn't want to do, but I did it. And now I know that I can do it.
Compare, and if you're around people like that or a coach like that or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or, a partner like that, to be around somebody that doesn't offer you those challenges feels like super boring.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, again, using fitness as an example, I prefer to train with people that are stronger than me. I like training with people that are weaker than me in those sessions of like kind of training them. But naturally, if I work out with somebody that's stronger than me or more advanced in other ways of movement and fitness, then that forces me outside of my comfort zone. Yep. So I'll grow a little bit, or maybe I always offer people like, let's do your workout today. Yeah, I know when we train, we do the same thing. We're like,
well, it's funny. We both bump into each other. Like, let's do your, crap. Okay.
Yeah. Like, how about we do some of mine and some of yours?
I think a good rule for that is I've heard this from somebody else, but treat it like thirds. So in your life, have a third of the people be stronger than you in quotations, like metaphor, whatever, smarter, faster, wealthier, just like they've figured these different paths out more than you. Have 33% kind of like your bros. Yeah. Like we're all kind of in this together. Yeah. And then have 33% people that you teach.
Yeah.
So I think that, and that's the thing, that's the beauty is no matter who you're with, it's always interesting. If you're with someone and it's not interesting, it's probably because you're not that interesting. Mm-hmm. Like you can always find something about somebody that's like, like this, like we start to unravel a little bit on the face because my uninteresting mind wasn't able to open them up or open up just how magical this whole, like, wow, like where are we right now? Like, is this a dream? There's so much information happening right now. So I think if a person's mind is at a point where they're like bored, I think it's an opportunity to go, deeper in yourself and kind of like, fill in your chapters a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But I think that's if you're with the person that is weaker than you, whatever, then suddenly you can put your coaching cap on. Yeah. And say, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to be a really effective coach in this moment. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to challenge myself to make this moment really funny. really goofy, really unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of, we can always make things more interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I would add on to that I feel like a good coach isn't going to push you too far before you're ready. Maybe just give you, like, I think I've read somewhere like 10% outside of your comfort zone is a great place to aim for, not 50% or 100%.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to go into the gym and put like 4 plates on a squat rack and say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to push myself outside my comfort zone.
And that's what everyone has in common. Like, that's the common ground that every person can relate to, is if you're some elite athlete, bodybuilder, whatever, you maintaining that zone of proximal development or pushing that 10% beyond your boundary, you can be with somebody else that shares that.
Mm-hmm.
And they are just started lifting weights, or they just started anything, but they're still in that zone. And so you guys can both be in that zone together and have that mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what happens in a team dynamic, or like in probably, like, you could say, like, any type of military type thing, or if you go through buds or something. It's like you guys were all different levels of athletes involved, but each person, they were in that zone and they were really pushing it.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly we have that mutual appreciation and respect for each other. And I think that that's a primary. It's like a macronutrient that humans crave, is to do hard things. And then ironically, we've done everything we can to outsource all of the hard stuff. And then I think we end up feeling like claustrophobic and tight and backed up. And, like, most cultures historically have gone through some type of rite of passage of some sort. You reach whatever the age is, 13 or 16 or whatever the time, depending upon where you're at. And okay, we're going to go through this like death ceremony. And it's going to be the hardest thing you ever thought possible. You're going to think that you die. There's a chance that you're going to die. And if you make it out on the other side, then you're free.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the closest replication in modern world that we have, that would be maybe doing like some type of like hard training type thing, like going to SEAL training or something, or psychedelic. Psychedelic's like the really obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, like ego death.
Yeah.
And you thought you were going to die, and then you thought you did die, and it was terrifying. And then on the other side of that experience, suddenly you have this sensation of freedom that you've never experienced before in your life, because you've been bound up and trapped and imprisoned inside of your mind and your story and your own domestication, to use the 4 agreements, not the 4 agreements. Yeah, 4 agreements. Yeah, that's what it's called, right? 4 agreements. No, the 4 rules. What's the book? Don Miguel Ruiz. Is it 4 agreements?
4 agreements. Yeah.
4 agreements.
4 agreements.
Yeah. So he describes it as you grow up, you're domesticated by these thoughts and ideas of who you think you are from your parents and religion and culture and school and all that. And then you're bound within that story. And during that time, hopefully you didn't get a bunch of limitations or self-worth issues or shame issues. But if you grew up in most cultures, at least in like most westernized cultures that I've been exposed to, you're probably going to have some. And then that's a weight that you carry until you go through that point that was so fucking hard.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, I accept my own demise. Like, I completely surrender. And then you come out on the other side and you're like, that's the same thing that happened in what is the movie? Oh God, I'm gonna have to come back to it. What's the movie where the fella took the girl down, imprisoned her, and wears a mask, and he she thought that she was gonna die, essentially, like.
Oh, V for Vendetta?
Yes, that's the V for Vendetta.
Yeah.
I don't know how I forgot that.
Yeah.
That's the V for Vendetta thing. That's what he did with her.
Mm-hmm.
He took her through this thing, took her like into the deepest, darkest parts of herself, and abuse, and locking her up in solitary confinement and starving, and then eventually she releases. Like, that was her rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that rite of passage was freedom. Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. I like to try to look at the challenges in my life as a sort of a curriculum, my life story, or like I'm a student of my own life, and the challenging moments are just part of my life's curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of my life, I hope to be a master of my experience. So seeking out, not in the moment maybe, but like, we all experience difficult chapters, difficult lessons in our life. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, some are more intense, some of them are more subtle.
Yeah.
And approaching those chapters with a curious viewpoint of like, this is teaching me something.
Yeah, you're a student.
Yeah, this is teaching me
It's
something.
like, oh, this lesson's
This is
harder.
offering me a valuable lesson in here somewhere that's going to be useful for the next chapter of my life, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, and that's what can happen in like the spiritual kind of realm, where it becomes a lot of like I don't know, spiritual bypassing is a common term.
Yeah.
Where it's you bypass like the human school.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, this is another Ram Dass thing. He was talking to some mentor fella. It was actually a dead mentor that he channels, or someone else channels.
Yeah.
Pat Rodegas is the gal's name that channels it. His name's Manuel.
Yeah.
Or Manuel. And that was one of the suggestions from Manuel to Ram Dass was, stop being so damn spiritual. Like, take the human curriculum. You got dropped into this human suit. Like, you don't need to be this enlightened, samadhi, divine being that's always so high. Like, you can get in the thick of being a human and acknowledge that all of that's spiritual too. And anything that's hard in one's life is just like a heavier dumbbell. And then I think as a person starts to become more adept with lifting dumbbells, they can start to look forward to heavier dumbbells.
I like that analogy.
It's all right.
Again,
I can probably work on it a little bit.
There's work with that, but that's good. It's a good starting point. I feel like we've dropped a lot of fitness analogies for working internally, which I like. Yeah. I really like.
The other thing I think is interesting that I was gonna mention before is the way that we perceive the world. Every bit of information that we perceive comes through your human meat suit. It comes through your five senses. Maybe you got more senses, whatever, but you hear information, you see information, you taste information, you smell information, you touch information. And all of that is subjective based off of the stories that you have around that information. So no one experiences anything exactly the same. And so if you're a person that your filter is all jacked up, your filtration system of how you process information is skewed to perceive things as, being really dangerous or being really, I don't know, threatening or, being really boring or being really whatever. Or you're not able to extract like the whole story from a scenario. I think the opportunity is to come back to the body and like clean up your filtration system. And if you can do that, and that's what having things like different anchors in the day, like maybe meditation or doing breath work or going for a run or going for a walk. If we're so burdened by all of the ongoing chatter, it's just like static all the time, then we're not going to be able to actually engage with life.
Yeah, like experience the fullness of life, because we're kind of like too caught up with our own stories about it.
Which then likely, I would think, that would lead to some sensation of angst or yearning for more and not knowing exactly what. This is like the Matrix, Neo, where he comes back or the whatever the other Matrix people are come back and like taking him out of the Matrix and telling the stories about himself and how he has these sleepless nights and he has this deep yearning for something more. He doesn't know exactly what it is. I think that probably a lot of us, I think me, has some sensation of that. Like, I'm yearning for more, but I don't know what it is exactly. And I bet if we are fully open, all of our senses are fully open and we're not bombarded by all this scattered information. I mean, I'm just like spitballing here, but we could perceive more, gather more, and feel more fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the potential to feel more fulfilled or completely fulfilled if we actually are clear to take in the world as out there.
Yeah. I mean, essentially,
it might be a little
no,
far.
I was following you. I think everybody else will be too. I think what you're describing is like misalignment, right?
Yeah.
Is that there's some type of misalignment happening within you, and a good goal would be to find alignment with whatever that is.
Or clarity.
Or clarity, or just, finding the freedom on the other side of that misalignment, or the discord that exists between you and the things that you feel called to do or desire, or maybe desire to move in a certain way, or have a certain career that's more fulfilling, or have a relationship that's more fulfilling, maybe have a relationship with yourself that's more complete and embodied rather than kind of disconnected.
What do you do to find more clarity? Because I feel like you, from my vantage point, do a good job at having anchors throughout your day or throughout your life. It seems like you really care, which is a really admirable quality. And it's like beautiful to be around, being around people that like really care, And sometimes you be around people, it's like, I think everybody cares, everybody's love and light. Like if you go back, peel back the layers far enough, but to be around people that's like, they exude this characteristic that they're actively listening, or I don't know, they would probably cry if a puppy died.
Yeah.
Like you like stayed tapped into that part.
Yeah. I think for me, it is doing those practices of first connecting with myself, or doing the things that fill me up first. So one is moving my body. The other one is eating food that makes me feel good and it's aligned with my belief systems. And then doing things like meditation, getting outside, skating. I literally schedule into my calendar skating for sunset, because that is where I find I can just be present with what is. And that is when I get most of my creative ideas.
Yep.
Is I will be just skating and moving, and I'll have these downloads of what I want to create, how I want to shift or pivot, a conversation that I want to have, a thought that maybe hadn't come to surface and I hadn't dealt with it. And that for me allows me to show up in every other area of my life with a more heart-centeredness, and move through life that way, and have relationships that way. Because if there's something happening in my body, if my leg is asleep and I'm trying to have a conversation with you, as much as I try to have a conversation with you, I'm thinking about my leg being asleep. Or if something else is on my mind and I haven't been able to actually look at it or be with it, then I'm not going to be able to sit with you or care about or focus my attention on anything else.
You need to take a shower, like before, if you do something and you're all like dirty or messy or disheveled or whatever, that like everybody knows the sensation of like a shit shower and shave. You have that, you get done with shit shower and shave, you're like, damn, like I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Like all that stuff in the past doesn't matter. Like here we go.
Yeah.
And so it's so valuable to have that, not just from a mental situation, but also a physical situation, because I think they're indivisible. And one of the things that is really a high leverage tool in this is acknowledging that your environment is continually forming you. So I did a podcast with Bruce Lipton. He's the biology of belief guy. Familiar with him at all?
I've heard the name before.
Epigenetics.
Yes.
He's amazing. He was like one of my heroes when I was a teenager. So it was really cool to get to like go out to his place, and he was like, I don't know if I can say he was growing cannabis. Maybe I can't say that. I think it was legal. Whatever. We got to have
he lives in a state where it's
cannabis
legal.
together. He's out like whatever. It's a very nice experience. But yeah, so that was really cool for me to get to be with a person that was like a childhood idol, and then be like 30 odd years old and be like with the guy. It was very cool, reflective moment. But one of the things that he talks about a lot is if he's a cellular biologist, and when you want to change some aspect of the cell in a petri dish, you don't do anything to the cell itself. You change the culture that it exists within.
Mm-hmm.
So you add titrate some new chemicals or this or that, and suddenly this cell will start to change its orientation based off of how you shifted the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is very clearly what happens with human beings, and so this is fancier conceptual language would be systems theory. Systems theory in relation to biology suggests that human beings are self-organizing systems that organize around our environment.
Mm-hmm.
So if it gets cold in the room, you change. You go horripilation, and your hair starts coming up, and if that keeps happening, you might start developing brown adipose tissue, and your body responds to the coldness of the room. If it gets hot, something else happens. If it's really bright in the room, suddenly your pupils will contract to pull in less light. Suddenly, maybe it'll start to downregulate melatonin depending upon the hour. It sends the signal to your physiology. It's like, okay, blue light, wake up, time to go. It gets dark in the room. You don't need to do anything. Your body just processes darkness and organizes around darkness.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a relationship with somebody, you organize around the relationship. If you're in a room where all you have access to from a musculoskeletal perspective, British people call it skeletal. You ever hear somebody say that?
No, what is that?
Musculoskeletal. That's just how they pronounce skeletal.
Oh, no. It was a whole new word.
Anytime I say skeletal, I always whisper my inner voice as skeletal in the background. So if you're in a room where all you have from a movement perspective, all you have access to, the ranges of motions that you have access to, are consistently pretty much just being like hunched over in a chair.
Mm-hmm.
So your bed, 90 degrees. When you squat down to get on the bed, 90 degrees. Your toilet, 90 degrees, which is inherently dysfunctional to defecate. When you go into a 90-degree position, when you're standing, your rectum has it goes into an angle called the anorectal angle. There's a muscle called the puborectalis that wraps around it and literally like locks up your poop chute so you don't poop your pants while you're taking a walk. And then when you start to squat, that angle starts to open. And in the bottom of that deep squat, your rectum is open to have a poop. Which is interesting that we've transitioned away. Like the idea, like, could you imagine going to some country and having it just be a squat toilet?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
The agony of doing what your body is structured to do since the beginning of humanity. How crazy.
Yeah. So we're not even pooping right.
You're not even pooping right now.
So what do you use, like a squatty potty? Like one of those things where it's like a platform on the...
Yeah, I squat potty sometimes. I used to squat up on the toilet. I haven't done that for a while. I get through stages.
You used to squat up on the toilet?
I still will sometimes. It feels good.
That's funny.
So your environment, you formed your environment. And so it's just wild that our days are predominantly in this 90-degree position. 90 degrees the hips, 90 degrees the ankles, 90 degrees the knees. Posterior tilted, rolled under, like sad puppy dog position, like I did something wrong position. Shoulders rolled forward, clasping on a cell phone.
Yeah.
Or carpal tunneling ourselves on a keyboard.
Yeah, or driving with
jutting our heads forward in a forward head posture, creating this upper crossed syndrome thing where we're shortening the muscles in the suboccipital ridge and shortening the muscles around the pecs and then elongating the inverse guys. And that's like the position that our modern environment molds us into. We self-organize around our furniture because we're so darn adaptive. It's so cool. And so then the opportunity to say, okay, what if I change? And then all of those positions obviously are tied in, maybe not obviously, but they're tied into the way that we think, the way that we feel, and the way that we produce ourselves at a neurochemical and hormonal lens. Which is pretty freaking cool.
So go ahead.
So when these say, like when you were feeling stressed or you're in that defensive state or whatever, your body forms into defense. Your body forms into stress. And so all of those muscles in and around like the neck and the facial muscles and diaphragm and all this stuff up here where we're gathering information. It's like our sense receiver system. Those are continually sending signals. They're all tied into it's called the 12 cranial nerves. Those nerves are tied into our autonomic state. And when you can literally like almost play those muscles or play those nerves, like one of those, what is those like wind up piano things called? You turn it and they're like, dun, 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 dun.
I don't know.
What's it called?
I don't know what it's
You know
called.
what
I know
I'm
what you're
talking
talking
about,
about. Yeah.
Yeah. So you contracting and relaxing these different pulley systems in your body, it literally is tied into your autonomic state. So when you are afraid, you contract these muscles, you breathe in a way. When you're relaxed, you relax these muscles, you might activate some other muscles.
Mm-hmm.
There's an ongoing conversation, ongoing translation for your physical expression into your autonomic state and your mental emotional experience. And so we can come in and start to say, okay, I'd like to occupy a more open body, a taller body, a stronger body, a more stable body, a more flexible body, a more confident body, a funnier body, a sillier body, a more dynamic, like whatever you want, doesn't matter. It's okay. So what would I do? This body being like the cell in the dish. I don't do anything to the body. I do something to the culture that the body exists in. Okay, maybe I create a space in my home that takes me through a fuller range of motion through my joints. Okay, what does that since the beginning of forever? Getting up and down off of the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So you do what we just did up on your roof, and you sit, and you can sit on a normal chair and cross your legs, or do what a kid would do, or like a monkey,
Mm-hmm.
or a primate or whatever. You put any type of healthy creature in nature or a child, if you put them in a chair, there's nothing wrong with the chair. The chair is just a tool. All the creatures will kind of form and they'll kind of do different stuff, and they'll might cross their legs. Maybe they'll like go upside down for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll allow their body to keep on going through these full ranges of motion. So the chair's not bad. But something that a person could do immediately to change their environment, create a space in your home where it just makes sense to get up and down off the ground, put floor cushions, get a comfy rug, ideally maybe put that space near a window, maybe open the window so you're getting full spectrum light, allow the various chemicals, the phytoncides and such that come off of plants outside that boost your immune system, they make you feel good. There's an interesting thing in relation to nature. There's a lot of interesting things in relation to nature, but just having a visual access to being able to see out into nature, to be able to see some trees. That's been shown. This has been shown quite a few times, but there's one particular study, I think it was done in University of Pennsylvania, somewhere in Pennsylvania, and it was with patients in hospitals for gallbladder surgery. And what they found was that patients who had access to a window where you could just look out and like see some trees, see some nature, they would need less pain medication. So they would feel their pain threshold would raise. Another thing that lessens people's necessity for pain medication is having the choice to take pain medication.
Mm-hmm.
If I feel like I'm out of control, then I'm more in pain.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in control, then I'm like,
yeah.
Okay, I can do this.
I think I've read that research where they give access to the IV drip or the pain medication to the patients, and they end up using less than if they were to just be administered.
Yeah. Yeah. And then those patients also released from hospital, I think it was on average 2 days earlier. So just having the visual connection to being able to see the nature literally changes the way that you produce yourself. You didn't do anything. You weren't even in the nature really, but visually you were in the nature. And suddenly your body, your Nimai self-organizes around that visual experience of being able to consume the nature with your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So cool.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, some people do this like naturally. Some people just like to be outside. Some people prefer to have a view. Some people will, to take a walk or things like that.
Who are the people that don't? I wonder what's the person that doesn't. because it does exist. People that are kind of in like more of like their gear is more in like an emo state, you know, like I want darkness, dark pants, dark shoes, dark shirts, you know, like if I go outside, I'm like, oh, you know, I wonder what that is.
Symptom of their environment.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
there's
like
no right or wrong, but in my mind, I'd be like, everybody wants that, right?
Yeah.
Like I'd imagine probably, I would guess every person listening to this podcast would be like, oh yeah, that's what I like.
Yeah. So then what are some things within a home environment that you can change to
Bring plants in.
Okay.
Yeah, you gotta bring plants in. One, there was research done in from NASA particularly where they studied. You can look at. I almost included this in my book, but I didn't. They studied, I don't know, lots of different plants to see which ones oxygenate and filter the air the best. And so people could just look up, you know, like snake plants were an example of them. There's a bunch. Yeah.
There's one right behind you.
Yeah. I mean, it's really like, I think pretty much most any plant, just bring plants in there.
Yeah.
But if people are interested, you look up like NASA plants, oxygenation, air filtration. And you'll come up with like a list of the 20 top plants that do that. That's a really good idea. And it also makes you have something that you're taking care of, which puts you into the story, augments your story to be a caretaker, which is cool.
That is cool.
Yeah, you're just like having that. It's like having a pet, you know, or a relationship or anything. You know, a lot of, well, yeah, I think that's enough. I think that people get that. Like having these, we're continually having this feedback from our environment, and you just getting that water and pouring it on the plant. Even if you pay somebody to get the water and pour it on the plant, you're still responsible for caretaking for that plant. It does this little thing. You're like, yeah, like I take care of things. You know, so I think that's a really good one. Getting, you know, natural light as much as you can. If you live in a place that's darker, like in, you know, apartment that's darker or something of the sort, you don't have access to windows, or as, you know, windows that aren't getting so much sun, just go outside as often as you can. Start scheduling calls where you're walking outside.
Yeah, walking.
Schedule meetings, like you and I, like when we have meetings, in quotations, you know, it's like almost every meeting that you and I have ever had has been doing some type of movement outside. That's really cool. You know, so start forming your relationships. You know, maybe there's some people that the only thing that person wants is like into doing is like going to a bar. Like that's my bridge. That's my connection with that person. That's fine. There's no right or wrong. It's just what's the outcome of your organism existing in some dark bar with regularity. It's not a bad or good thing. It's just like what does that translate to? You know, and saying like, huh, interesting. There's probably some friends that like to go jogging or go for a walk or go bird watching or freaking go for a swim or go skating. You know, so start, you know, you become the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with, is a Jim Rohn quote. So paying attention to, you know, how do my friends, the people that I spend time with, form, you know, my biology, I think is interesting as well. Like your friends are your environment.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And they influence you the same way you influence them. Yeah. The same way your environment influences you.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're saying, so you're talking about, you mentioned, furniture, right? So
big one. Get a pull-up bar in your house.
Okay. Something to hang from.
Not to do pull-ups, but just to hang. Oh boy. I just smacked myself with the microphone. That was awesome. Yeah. Get a pull-up bar. And so there's I have a whole chapter in the Align Method book about the value of hanging. A lot of the research that I got for that came from several places, but one was from a guy called Dr. John Kirsch, who wrote a book called Shoulder Pain. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and he found that 99% of the patients that he would see for some type of shoulder impingement syndrome, he could get them completely recovered, relieved of any pain, just going through a pretty basic hanging protocol with a few different exercises along with it. And the suggestion in that, or the reality in that, is when our shoulders are chronically kind of like raised up and immediately rotated, it starts to close off space, particularly a space called the coracoacromial arch. There's a coracoacromial ligament that goes across that place. It's kind of like the top of the shoulder girdle. And when you were continually elevating the shoulders, immediately rotating the shoulders, it starts to close that space down. Eventually, it starts to become almost like calcified in a way, or like gunky, dehydrated in there. And then it limits that range of motion. And then so just the simple practice of hanging, it starts to open up that space. So you have full range of motion of the shoulder. Where that gets interesting is many people lack range of motion in one joint, and then they borrow that range that they didn't have in the shoulder, for example, from a place that's maybe typically hypermobile with a lot of people, like the lumbar spine. So can't get your arm up over your head. You get maybe up to about here. And then you're like, you want to really get it straight up over your head. So you dump your spine. So now all of a sudden you're in this hyperlordosis, and you're just destabilizing your axial skeleton. You're destabilizing like the frame of the chassis of your car. If you destabilize the chassis, the frame, the main line, the central nervous system, then everything else is limited by the amount of stability that you can create with the spine. So if the spine is unstable, then everything else that you do will be limited, because your body, if you can't create leverage off of the spine, because it's not like a stable post to be able to create leverage from, then it would be dangerous for you to be stronger, which is kind of interesting to stew on. Limitation in a shoulder joint, or maybe like an ankle could be another example of that, or any place in the body that there's a site-specific limitation that can end up trickling up into the stability and support that we can create with our spine. And then the rest of the body organizes around how stable we can become with our spine.
So with your experience of helping people and training and giving workshops, what do you find to be the most common limitations from people? Tight hips?
Yeah, hips like, are one. I mean, just look at. So there's a guy. I think he's like an exercise physiologist. His name's Vladimir Yanda, and he came up with a model of the body that essentially kind of breaks down the common postural patterns of the modern day, and he refers to the different orientation of the muscles to be the phasic muscles and the tonic muscles. Typically, people in the modern world have these tonic muscles, which are chronically like tight and short. They're the muscles in the front of the body for the most part. They kind of pull us forward into like this like defense type position. And then there's the phasic muscles, which are the muscles that would pull you open into extension and into like, being open to the world. And so those muscles will be chronically flaccid or inhibited or disengaged. And a body that is in the common positions that we're talking about will start to display that pattern where like the muscles in the front will kind of get tight, short, pulled forward. Then you go do a workout, you do some, whatever. If you're in, like I was really poorly training bodybuilding years ago, and I was like really enamored with the muscles in the front of the body because I could see them. So I'm perpetuating that cycle of tightening the already or shortening the already really short muscles and not paying enough attention to the muscles in the back. So I think that just becoming excited about engaging with the muscles or the parts of the body that you don't see, and reducing the limitation of what you can and can't do with the body. We have so many rules and stories of, okay, you can do this, you can't do that. And I just recorded a podcast with a friend called Ben Patrick. He's the knees over toes guy on the internet. And that was one of the things that he was suggesting. That's like, I really appreciate his lens on like movement. Is pretty much like the best spine position or like exercise is like whatever movements you can do with the spine, explore them. To let go of these rigid rules of what I can and can't do with my body. Like if you're just standing, twist left, twist right, turn up, down, like let go of limitation of what you can and can't do with your body would be, I think, a big thing. Like go of like the dogma or the story or the rules of like, how can
You
my
should
body
walk and
be?
act, yeah.
What shapes are okay for my body? Is this
Yeah.
an okay shape? And I think that's a big thing. It's just like starting to. There's a quote from a guy called Alvin Toffler. He said the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we learn these rules of how to be in our body. Then the process is unlearning those rules to start to be able to listen to like what's my body actually saying, and then be able to relearn, what actually feels right for us. And within that, the environmental conditions that we're in, it's going to be like, short hips, iliopsoas particularly, which is going to lend itself to having that hyperlordosis or the pelvis dumping forward,
rotating forward. Yeah.
And then that's going to be causing the ribs to flare open. And then from that position, you're kind of like in that like Brazilian booty, your belly's all like splayed open. It's kind of like I think that culturally we think it's like attractive kind of sort of. But functionally speaking, it's quite disadvantageous, for any like longevity in the body. So those would be one thing, would be starting to open up the hips into extension while maintaining support and stability through the spine. And so a simple cue for people would just be guiding the ribs down towards the hips. When you're lifting, when you're standing, when you're walking, it's probably pretty high likelihood that when you're walking or doing any activity, your ribs are flared open. And so your abs are kind of disengaged. And a beautiful cue to start to stabilize a person's spine is just to suggest they just kind of allow those ribs to like rest down towards the hips. That's a really simple one. And yeah, as you start to open up the hips, open up the ankles, especially particularly like into dorsiflexion or the toes going back towards your knees position, that will potentiate or open the opportunity for you to go open the hips all the way. So as we take a step, the ankle, your cat's scratching the couch. As we take a step, the ankle, as it comes, the back foot steps on the ground, goes into that dorsiflex position, toes back towards the knees. If there's a limitation there, then I can't get a full stride. And now there's a limitation in my hip. There's a limitation in my hip. That movement's going to go up through the hip, and then it's going to go across the body, called the anterior oblique sling, if you want to be specific about like, a fancy term for that kind of spiral relationship. It goes from opposite hip to the opposite shoulder. So now as I'm taking a walk, because there was a limitation in my ankle or my big toe, wherever, suddenly it's in my hip. And now suddenly I can't get full range of motion into my shoulder. Now there's a limitation in my thoracic spine won't move. So it's I think that maybe sounded complicated, and I apologize if it did. But really what I'm saying is the whole body is connected.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So just get interested. And some of the things a person can do, like a big one, to start opening up the spaces in the toes, in the ankles, in the the hips, to open up more space for the knees to not be able to just get dumped on by the lack of range of motion that we have in our ankles or our toes or our hips, would be spending time on the ground, which it sounds so like asinine and like silly.
Ghost scratching. Is scratching the chairs.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's so like all sorts of theoretical wandering, I think, comes back to if you just spend time on the ground, go through some basic positions with some level of regularity, that acts as a tuning mechanism for your body. It's not you need to do this one exercise and then go back to the lifestyle that created the thing. Start to change the lifestyle to fit the body that you desire, and there's longevity there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I try to do that too, as far as like doing deep squats, just like while I'm sitting down, like waiting for something. Like it doesn't look very like common in most social settings. Like some people might look at that and be like, why is that guy just like squatting in the middle of like a group of people?
Unless you go to another country.
This is true. I guess
So
more
it's-
so
there's
in
no-
the
there's
country
no-
that I've spent the most time in,
Yeah.
which is this one.
So there's no normal,
Yeah.
right? Sorry, go on, I cut you
No,
off.
no. That was basically it. And even when I'm at home, I do the same thing. Just like I prefer to sit on the floor rather than sitting on couches
Yeah.
most of the time.
You've had so much. You've
Yeah.
had so much couch time. Like it's such a strange, and it's not strange. It makes total sense. But when the body becomes comfortable with exploring its full ranges of motion and delivering the synovial fluids and all the different fluids that keep the joints healthy, to go away from that, it's like when you become sensitive to it, you feel like you're almost dehydrating your joints.
Mm-hmm.
And so most people know when they're thirsty, unless they have some type of like thirst regulation issue. Pretty obvious. It's like, cool, every hour or so, it would be nice to have a sip of water. And sometimes I'm really thirsty. I want to drink a lot of water.
Mm-hmm.
When you become sensitive to the hydration of your joints, you can become aware when your joints are thirsty. Like literally thirsty. Like they're starting to become dehydrated and brittle and rigid and bound. Agglomerated is the fancy term for that, like glued together.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're sensitive into your body, you're like, oh, I want to get new nutrients into that space.
Mm-hmm.
That's a healthy body. That's what your cat's doing right now. It's just a matter of opening yourself up to those kind of like new shapes. And then suddenly it's not like a thing that a person does. It's just the way that they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. Like anytime that was the function of writing the book. That's the function of most any like program I've ever done or working with a client. My goal is to make this who you are. I don't care about what you do.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get this point, it's just like, no, this is just you, man.
It's part of who you are. Yeah.
This is not part of it. This is who you are, son.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a part of who you are because, who the hell knows what we are. But that's it. Like, that's the whole point. We get to that point, then it's like life works for us. It's a sensation of effortlessness.
Mm-hmm.
So sort that out with your work, sort that out with your relationships, sort that out with your nutrition, sort that out with your movement. It's like, then it's not this tedious thing that we do. And I have so much compassion for that model, or people that have only been exposed to that model, that fitness or working out is just this thing that I do probably because I don't want to be ashamed when I show up to wherever, and I don't want people to think I'm fat.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be so much more than that.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be in the gym either.
No.
Like going to the gym and lifting weights is just one very narrow version of fitness.
Yeah.
And what it means to move your body. And then all of the things that you're talking about. Like you don't have to be, you don't even have to have a gym membership. Like you said, you can just get outside, you can hang from trees, you can climb things, you can just go for walks, you can get on a bike, you can swim, all of these things that require different forms and modalities of movement that aren't even as rigid as something like bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Right.
There's another fancy term called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And that's like all the fidgeting, bits that we do throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're sitting in these chairs, both of us have kind of changed position a bunch of times. We're expending
some
calories.
energy. Yeah.
We're expending energy to do that. So a person that sits kind of more like an animal or like a kid, they'll just naturally kind of fidget around and twist and turn and readjust, and they'll look out the window a little bit. And, in the world that we grew up in, you'd call that like, oh, they have like attention deficit disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not okay, is it okay that your cat's crushing your couch? Should we do something about that?
He's going to do what he wants either way.
Cat does what he wants.
He's just moving his body.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just crazy, man.
Mm-hmm.
The world that we live in, it medicates people that are attracted to doing the things that feed them at a cellular level. So I just think it's such an interesting thing,
Mm-hmm.
that we live in a world that penalizes us for doing the things that oftentimes are the healthiest for our bodies. It's really impressive. Unless you go to like a Waldorf school or some type of like fancy,
like
non-traditional type school, or you like a nature school or something.
Unschooling. So, okay, so let's talk about the book, because I know that, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to give a small piece of who you are and your philosophies and your insight that you have about how to literally align your life through these different modalities of whether it is understanding your breath or understanding how to move differently throughout the day to where you can experience the fullness of life. So this new revised version of the book, is this more of a manual for that, to how to how would I reintroduce more natural ways of living and moving?
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, the way to describe it is like if you were an alien and you have no awareness of how to drive the body, the function of writing the Align method was to provide you the user's manual of all the things that you need without too much fluff. Yeah, so all of the fancy sciencey bits that you'd hear on like a Huberman podcast or maybe like a Rhonda Patrick podcast or something like that, broken down into simple, digestible information that's actionable that you can start to implement into your day right now. So that the intention with writing it, my litmus test with editing it, was being able to open up to any page, like literally like just like poof, page 167, whatever's on there, and to be able to extract information like simply that's going to make my day better right now. And that's the thing, is I think sometimes things can be, and I obviously am guilty of this based off of the last like hour and a half of us talking, where I can kind of wander off into the weeds of theory of like, what's going on here? But with the intention of writing the book is really making sure that it has some of the theoretical stuff, but it's really focusing on
the
actionable tips that people can implement right now.
And do you feel like, how would this book have helped you in the past?
Oh man. If I had read this book and listened to this book when I was 16, I would have saved myself joint dislocations. I would have saved myself chronic back pain. I would have saved myself just a complete, I had a complete, almost like masochistic relationship with my body, where it was just like, I need to be suffering. If my muscles are not sore, and I don't like waddle like a duck when I walk because my legs are so jacked up from a workout that I'm like failing. Like that was literally the way that I felt, which is fine. I'm not like mad at that. I mean, I think it was cool. I got much bigger and it was, it was a great experience. But it was, to be able to read this then, I would have just saved myself a lot of like injury and pain and it would have started a bridge of creating a better relationship with my body, as opposed to treating my body like a machine.
And then emotionally, how would it have helped too? I'm curious.
Well, I think that through starting to become engaged with what's happening with the body, inevitably that ties into what's happening with your emotions. So. Yeah, I wonder how that would have shifted. I don't know. I don't know exactly how that would have shifted things. But I mean, there's a lot. I don't know that I would have. I guess what I think is, I don't know if I would have had the eyes to be able to take it in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, would it have shifted anything from that lens? Like, if I digested it and I actually like implemented, yes. But would I actually do that? Like, I think I was so into like getting jacked and tan. I think maybe some of that would have been, I would have probably bypassed over that, and then I would have re-engaged with that in like 10 years and be like, oh yeah, this is good.
Yeah. I'm just curious because I feel like this would have allowed me to tap into those things more.
Yeah.
Like some of the components that you have in the book, as far as like even just like understanding how to breathe better, right? Or breathe more efficiently through our nostrils, and just tap into being present with what is. I feel like that was something that I didn't ever explore. It was more just so my breathing was a symptom of what I was doing rather than having intention behind my breath.
Yeah.
And that little simple element has allowed me to unlock a lot of emotional reservoirs or maybe expand my emotional capacity or emotional range in different ways too. So
yeah, if I mean, honestly, I wish my parents would have read the book. Or I mean, there's other books too that go into the breathing stuff. Jaws is an interesting book. James Nestor's Breathe is an interesting book. There's a book called Shut Your Mouth, Save Your Life by George Catlin. That's written like 200 years. Is interesting. Anything from Buteyko Method, Patrick McEwen, John Mew. There's a lot of the whole field of myofunctional therapy. This is a very rich field around the value of breathing in a way that's, better for your body. And I almost definitely grew up mouth breathing. My teeth were super crooked, so I think that growing up, if I could have gone back, had my parents read this, implemented it into me as a child, and like maybe even like taped my mouth when I'm like working out or something and really just like downloaded that information to me as like, dude, if you breathe through your nose, you're going to be a better athlete. You're going to have straighter teeth. You're going to have a more chiseled jawline. You're going to have a better immune system. You're like, everything will be better if you just understand how to breathe effectively. Why didn't anyone ever tell us that? Like, come on.
That's a great question. In some cultures, they do. I mean, some Eastern cultures, they teach the power of the breath and teach you how to breathe from an early age.
Yeah.
I mean, in more Western cultures, I feel like it's more absent.
Yeah.
But it's a very powerful lesson that we're not taught how to
look at our
navigate
Look
that.
at our teachers. I don't know. I don't really remember the shape of most of my teachers, but my guess is they probably weren't that spectacular of like embodied athletes. Like they were thinking about other stuff. So it's nothing against them. That's just not their lives. Their lives is teaching history and teaching calculus and, whatever, holding you in detention. Whatever you got to do, playing a movie because there's stuff to do, whatever the thing is. And they have their own lives, but like their focus isn't this stuff. Like it's almost like there's like a specialized focus in understanding these really like simple native patterns of the body. It's all there. It's all been there for a very long time. We've kind of slowly divorced ourselves away from some of those like tuning mechanisms for the body. And now we need like a specialist, someone's like really dorks out about this stuff to be like, oh, like, by the way, if you just go outside and expose some sunlight to your eyes in the morning, that'll set your whole circadian rhythm for the day.
Who would have thought?
Yeah. like, oh, sunlight?
Yeah.
I thought it just makes sunburn. It's bad for my skin.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you need sunlight. Like you need like a specialist or like some hippie aunt to tell you that. Breathing.
Change your life, man.
Orientation of your spine when you're doing shit. Like it's like, yeah, of course. And if you grew up in a place where it was, maybe you were carrying buckets of water on your head, you don't need to be taught spinal orientation. Every day you live your life, your body self-organizes around this point of weight coming up on the top of your head. So you grow up into it.
To stack it. Yeah.
Wow, this is just who I am.
Yeah.
Now suddenly that sends the signal to the rest of your nervous system that, oh wow, like I'm strong. This central channel is open. And it's stable. Okay, cool. I can kind of do whatever. I trust you. Let's get you stronger. Let's give you full access to all the power you got. And but if we go into a place where we're kind of cutting down, impinging various different places throughout that central channel called your spine, then your body says, okay, like, I think it'd be cool if you get maybe 60% power. But if you go like 75% power, I think you're getting an injury.
Yeah. I'll be redlining at that point.
Yeah, we're redlining at 70%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Wow. So I think let that be a lesson.
Yeah.
Maybe whoever's listening, just do a little audit.
Yeah.
See what areas in your body and the way you move, you feel like you're redlining, and just have the awareness first, and then start to look at your environment, start to look at how you're moving, see how you can integrate more movement patterns that maybe help you realign that place where you feel tension and stagnation and maybe even overcompensation or weakness. And that way you can start to have a more full experience of what it means to be alive. And that will overflow into every relationship that you have, whether it's with yourself, your environment, your career, your significant other. And voila, life is better.
and it's not something you have to do. Like, that's the big thing, is it's not at like the intention of writing the book wasn't to burden people with more shit to do.
Yeah. Add this
to anything, your. It's like you could do less.
Yeah.
You're doing too much.
It's not like it's adding it to your already long morning routine.
Yeah. It's saying, cool, let's just maybe reorient a few things in the way that we exist. And that times a day, times a week, times a year, times a decade, times 50 years, suddenly leads to, like in relation to the floor sitting thing, suddenly leads to elderly needing assisted living. The number one reason that elderly need assisted living is for fall risk. Suddenly that's just not even a conversation. Like, that's off the table. If you never stop getting up and down off of the ground, that whole conversation is just gone. That's crazy. Like, that's millions, probably more than that, of dollars, and just emotional sovereignty and autonomy and like pride. That's just that whole conversation that's just wiped off of Western culture's mindset just by maintaining that relationship through your whole life. You didn't do anything different. You were already sitting. You're just subtly changing the shape of the way that you sit.
Oh, well, thank you, Aaron.
Yep.
Thanks for coming on. And I always enjoy talking to you. I could listen to you talk for another hour and a half easily, and I'm sure we will after this too. But yeah, thanks again for coming on. I'm really glad that you were able to come on and give your insight. I know that everybody's listening has learned something, at least one thing from this podcast, that hopefully that they can move and integrate into their already existing way of being. And like you said, just changing it, reorienting yourself slightly. You don't have to do this grandiose effort to change everything in your day. Just like the little things that you're already doing, just you can become more natural and efficient at those things.
And then that makes you, I know we need to wrap this up and I keep going into new stuff, but that makes you a more magnetic person to be around. When you are more well-oriented in your body, more comfortable in your body, you know, like like your body's working for you as opposed to you having all these compensations working against you. Like, that person is, there's like this attraction to that person. You know, Charles Bukowski, I have a quote about him in the book. He says that he would refer to that as like a free soul, a person that you're not exactly sure what it is, but when you're around a free soul, you feel really good. You know, so that person that feels liberated in their body, they feel free in their body. They don't have all of these joint impingements and aches and pains and all that stuff. That's largely a product of just the environment that they've been formed into since they've been a little person. You know, how many 4-year-olds are like in chronic pain? I don't actually know. I don't think it's a lot. What do you think?
I would imagine it's not very much.
It's not very much.
Yeah.
I think it's once we get burdened by the stories, you know, and I think a lot of that comes into like guarding, hiding, shame patterns.
We're taught how to be a modern human.
They get downloaded real young. You know, and then it's the way that we move in the world, but we can start to almost like massage or unwind some of those postural patterns just by creating these subtle adjustments. And then, you know, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, but the second best time is right now. Like, your body language, the way that you communicate and show up, and just when you walk into a room, what people are gathering, you know, they're gathering millions of bits of information every time you just walk in. You're just visually like pouring information on them. And they're subconsciously observing the way that you breathe, the way that you use your eyes, all of these postural patterns, like every little gesture that you make. you're sending information. Even if you're just standing there, seemingly not doing anything, sending information.
Mm-hmm.
The way that there's no like body language hack, do this with your hands, negging, like all these different things that we do to kind of like hack people's sovereignty, essentially, hack people's subconscious. I think the thing that's really truly attractive is being around a person that seems, like they're living like a life on purpose, like their body's on purpose, And so I think that by starting to make these subtle shifts, it starts to pour into more aspects of one's life than just the way that they, how much weight that they can lift at a gym.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if the mechanics are set up into proper alignment, suddenly you can derive more leverage from your joints and lift more weight. All right, I think that's
all right. Cat's done.
Y'all need to really wrap this bitch up. That's what the cat just said.
Well, as per request of Lumi, we're going to
what a special creature.
Wrap this episode up. And if you want to follow Aaron, he's everywhere at Aligned Podcast or Aligned.
Yeah, LIGN Podcast.
Yes, that's your social or Instagram where you're most active.
Yeah. It's Instagram. We're getting all hot and bothered about YouTube right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the place that I'm most excited about. YouTube right now, but Instagram, YouTube, obviously the podcast,
and obviously the podcast too. Yeah. And I would love for everyone to check out his newly revised book, The Align Method, if you are interested in learning more about everything that we covered in this podcast and much, much more. So thanks again, Aaron.
Thank you.
I appreciate you for coming on. I look forward to our next conversation,
and thank you, Lumi.
Sending you all love and light.